Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live broadcast from TrueFire. Today, we are thrilled to have Laurence Juber joining us from Studio City in LA. I'm going to need a moment or two to cover just a few of LJ's pedigree and accomplishments across an amazing, very impressive musical career. Grammy-winning solo performer, recording artist, composer, arranger. He can play anything, and everything he plays is top caliber. Folk, jazz, rock, blues, pop, fingerstyle, classical, anything you throw at him, he's got it covered. Right after graduation from London's Goldsmiths College, he was featured guitar soloist with the National Youth Jazz Orchestra. Became a established studio musician in the mid-70s. And then Paul McCartney tapped him on the shoulder to join Wings as lead guitarist between 1978 and 1981. He won his first Grammy on that gig, but that gig was only the start. Since then, LJ established himself, world-renowned guitar virtuoso and entertainer, recorded, more than 24 albums on his own. One of my favorites, one of everyone's favorites, is LJ Plays the Beatles, voted one of Acoustic Guitar Magazine's all-time top 10 albums. If you don't have it, rush and get that one. His solo arrangement of the Pink Panther theme earned him a second Grammy. His arrangement of Stand By Me was heard nationally in the Diamonds Are Forever commercial. His DVD audio project, Guitar Noir, won a CES Demi Award for Best Audio. 4 guitar folios in print. My personal favorite, Guitar with Wings, a photo memoir. Studio musician, you've heard him on hundreds of, could go on for probably another 30 minutes. And I just want to say personally, I just love this guy. He's extremely bright, extremely insightful, and we are just, privileged and proud to have him as a part of the TrueFire family. So LJ, are you there in Studio City?
I am, yeah. Good to see you, Brad.
I told you I couldn't. How do you possibly do a short intro for you? It's not possible.
Well, there is a short intro. It's my favorite is One of Those Guitar Guys.
I know that tune. I picked out that tune because I'll never forget. I was at the Chet Atkins convention, and of course, I knew you. I knew you as a member of Wings, and it's when you first kind of came on my own radar screen. And I'm outside in one of the halls, and I hear what turns out to be you playing that tune, I believe, in one of the big halls. I walk in, and just blown away, man, because connecting the dots between what you were doing with Wings and what you do as a solo, recording artist, just blew me away. One of my favorite tunes of all time.
Oh, thanks.
So you have put together, true to form. It's not just, sit around and play some tunes. You've got a really cool guitarology presentation for us. Tell us a little bit about what you're going to do today.
Well, I'm going to hit on some historical touchstones that are things from a few different eras where they've had an impact on the course of the instrument or on the course of music making that involves the instrument in a way that still resonates today, even stuff from the Renaissance, for example. So I've got a few things picked out that I want to just kind of play a few tunes, answer a few questions, and just generally give kind of a little bit of a timeline and kind of where, a few names, a few guitar heroes that most people have never heard of as well. The guitar has a long history, and I find myself drawing inspiration from it on a fairly regular basis. So I want to share some of that today.
Awesome. Before we dig into that, would you play a tune for us just to kick things
Sure.
off? How about Catch?
Yeah. You got it.
There we go. Thank you, man. Hey, dig that
welcome.
mic very much. What is that mic you're using?
That's an ear trumpet.
Ear trumpet. Beautiful.
Ear trumpet.
Yeah,
It's
those
a
are great.
company out of Portland. A lot of the bluegrass musicians are using them. It's a nice condenser mic. Although I'm not using it for the guitar. I've got a little Neumann tucked away down here. Plus, I've got the guitars with pickups in. I'm going direct as well, so it's a combo. Yeah.
And you're working out. We talked a couple of weeks ago. You're kind of set up there at home. You're in almost regular work mode, except you can't go out and about, right? So
Right.
you're pretty comfortably positioned there in your home studio, yes?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a home studio since the early 80s, and just make records here, make mostly my own records here, but done over the years, done 4 albums with Al Stewart here, and I've done a lot of TV and movie scoring, and so it's just set up, and I just kind of adapted things to be able to get out, and do virtual concerts and teaching and all of that.
Nice.
So shall I? You want me to get started here? I'm going to give you a few things to think about.
Yes, please
There's
do.
an intersection. And now I'm in DADGAD tuning right now, DADGAD, and I'm going to give you a little history and also a little kind of thread into why I use DADGAD in the way that I do. So 1 second.
Okay. While you're getting set up there, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping. Ask our audience, first of all, thank you guys for tuning in wherever you happen to be in the world, which is actually what we'd like to know. Let us know where you tuned in from and we'll shout out to you. And Tommy, why don't you share today's trivia question with everybody?
You got it. So today, guys, the big trivia question for Laurence Juber is, what recent #1 album did Laurence play electric guitar on? And the answer is not going to be given right now. The answer needs to go into the trivia. Hit the link there we've got in the chat. Look that up. You have to do a little bit of digging for sure. It's not a super, super easy one because he's played on so many records. But there was a recent #1 hit. That's the question. Hit the trivia link for the answer.
And the hint is you will find it on his website, along with a lot of great additional information about LJ. And don't answer it in the thread. Make sure you click that link. Make sure you tell us where you're tuned in from as well.
That's
you
right.
ready, LJ?
I am.
Cool. Stage
And
is yours.
just a tip with the trivia is you're not going to find it on Wikipedia. You know, I find stuff on my Wikipedia page I didn't even know I played on. So anyway, I'm going to give you a little bit of a bourrée by Bach. So this dates from about 1720 thereabouts. And this is an 1893 Martin 121. Is what we refer to as a parlor guitar. So this is a Bach bourrée in E minor. So that's a fun little piece to play. But here's an interesting factoid. If you ever see Paul McCartney in concert, he will reference that piece of music as being the inspiration for his accompaniment to Blackbird. Now, you look at Blackbird, and you think about that Bach. It's the same kind of movement. He's using tenths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, which is a third expanded by an octave. You've got contrary motion, where the bass line and the melody line are moving in opposite directions. And so that makes perfect musical sense, but what was a mystery to me was how he learned it. And he said he and George learned it together. Well, George didn't take classical guitar lessons. He had some jazz guitar lessons, but not classical guitar. And then I discovered this. This is a 1957 album by Chet Atkins called Hi-Fi in Focus. And on this album is that Bach bourrée. So then I contacted Mark Lewison, who's like the uber expert on Beatles trivia. And I said, do we know if George had this album in his record collection? And he says, yes, we do. Because one of the fans from the Cavern Club actually did an inventory of his records. And that album was in there. So there you have a link, there you have a link from Bach to the Beatles via Chet Atkins. And Chet Atkins is kind of a nexus for a lot of things. Now, the thing about Blackbird is that, you know, it's an accompaniment. I mean, Blackbird singing in the dead of night, you know, he's singing it. Now, to do an arrangement of that for solo guitar instrumentally, where you have to work the melody in, how does that work in standard tuning when your fingers are all caught up in doing the accompaniment? So what I did was to do it in dadgad in the key of A. So let me grab the dadgad tuned guitar. Quick tune up. So basically, and this gives you a little bit of an insight into my process, what I did was I started with the melody and then worked in the accompaniment from there. So let me play you Blackbird. Hang on. Let me get the pickup back on.
Yeah.
Blackbird.
Very nice. Is that on the LJ Plays the Beatles recording?
Volume 2.
Volume 2.
LJ Plays the Beatles. I've done 4.
Nice.
Wow.
There's probably room for 5 or 6 too, I think. You play a lot.
Well, I don't know.
You play a lot in Dadgad. What is it about that tuning that drew you to it?
That's a long discussion.
Yeah.
It's really kind of a course when it really comes down to it. Basically, what it does is that it opens up the guitar. For example, you've got an adjacent G string and an A string, which means that you can do these kind of scale figures where you don't have to play in a linear fashion, that you can play melodically and harmonically in a much more conjoined way. There are benefits to having the low D, and also to have 3 octave strings. There's 3 D strings. There are 2 A strings. So octaves are very accessible. And also, because of the adjacent scale tones, the kind of voicings that might in standard tuning be a stretch, like a stacked 9th chord, C, E, G, B flat, D, when you go up and down the neck. Whereas in standard tuning, you'd have to finger it like this, and you'd just be, it's a knuckle buster for stuff like that. But it's a long discussion, really, because there's a lot with Dadgad, and I'll touch on a bit more of it momentarily. But I wanted to go back further than Bach. I want to go back to the Renaissance and talk for a minute, talk about the fact that in the 16th century, there were a few chord progressions that in that era were really the equivalent of the 12-bar blues, and as we know them. They're slightly different progressions, but I'm going to switch guitars, and before I do, I'm actually going to pull out a different instrument for one moment. This thing that looks like a mandolin on steroids is a Renaissance lute, which is a beast to play and more of a beast to keep in tune. And I'm halfway through refretting it. You know, you got to tie the frets on. It's not the easiest instrument to deal with. But there's a trick. You can play lute music on a regular guitar by doing a little fancy slight retuning. So this guitar I've retuned. And what you do is you simply drop the third string down to F sharp. You go down a half step on the third string, on the G string. If you put a capo on the third fret, you're now in exactly the same pitch and the same tuning as lute music. So you can take tablature, and there's like so much tablature you can find online. But I want to give you, I'm going to play you something from 1538. That would be, which is a piece called Guárdame las vacas. It means watch my cows. It's actually a ballad. And this is famous because it was an early hit for the vihuela, which was the Spanish version of the lute, which was strung the same but looks much more guitar-like. I'm just going to play you a little bit of it. And then it goes into a set of variations. And it so goes on from there. Now, what's important about this progression is that it's something called the Romanesca, which was itself a slight modification on a progression called the passamezzo antico. Passamezzo is Italian for half step. Basically, the passamezzo was a dance, and the progression, the chord progression that we're dealing with. Let me just put this back in standard. This progression, let's say you have C, G, A minor, E, C, G, A minor, E, A minor. Now, the other variation on that, the one that we refer to as the passamezzo antico, actually is basically the same but starts on the A minor. It will be when it's in tune. Thank you. So you've got these two related chord progressions. And we know these progressions. So I was looking at the wrong tuner. I have two different tuners going on here. There we go. Okay, so green sleeves. So that's the verse, the chorus. That's those two progressions, what I refer to as kind of the minor blues of the 16th century, the passamezzo antico and the passamezzo moderno. Then there's another, the passamezzo antico and the romanesca. The passamezzo moderno is a major key progression that also is known as the Gregory Walker. There's a bit of a story behind that. Thomas Morley, who was an English composer of the Elizabethan era, referred to this particular progression as the Gregory Walker because a Gregory was a slang term for a barbershop. And in the barbershop, they didn't have like Renaissance People magazine or anything that you would sit and read. They would have instruments hanging on the wall. And people, when they were waiting for their haircut or their shave, or, you know, and because barbers use sharp instruments, they also would do minor surgery too, that they would jam. There would be these instruments hanging on the wall, like a lute or a cittern or a fiddle or something. And they would jam, and they would always use this particular chord progression. And so Thomas Morley said, you know, when you walk into a Gregory, you hear this. So he referred to it as a Gregory Walker. The original version of it would be, let's say, in D. D, G, D, A, D, G, D, A, D. Let me just switch to the other guitar for a sec.
You're going to need a guitar tech there at the home studio, I think.
Now, remarkably, there's very little music that actually was published that uses this chord progression. But if you think of it like the blues, where it was really a vehicle for improvisation. But there is one particular piece that I'm going to play a little bit of that uses this progression. Except there's a slight twist to it. Instead of going back to the G chord, the 4 chord, there it goes to the flat 7. It goes to the C chord. So this is a ricercato, which is an Italian term, means to seek or to search. And it was basically, it's kind of like a written out improvisation on this chord progression. This dates from like 1553. And it goes on with a set of variations like that. Now, the thing about this chord progression is you hear it a lot. I mean, when I call out your name and you know wherever I am, I'll come running to see you again. It's that. It's in an Americanized form where you don't make the first change to the 4 chord. Where you just stay on the 1. I would come on the sloop jumpy, grandpappy, and she'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes. She'll be coming round the mountain, round the mountain when she comes. Same chord progression. So that's a chord sequence that goes back to the Renaissance. Now, where does that take us in Beatle world? It gets us here. All right, back to the DAG guitar for a minute. Basically the same chord progression.
Beautiful.
So,
Man.
so outstanding. So you take a chord progression from the Renaissance, you add a Chuck Berry bass line to it, and then you infuse it with some the key of D. I'm in Dagad tuning. When you go to the 5 chord, stuck when I got to the 5 chord because I wouldn't have had an open string to bounce off. So there's a benefit of being in Dagad. You know, and Dagad really isn't just to be played in D. I mean, I use it for a lot of different keys. You know, I have an arrangement of Runaway, for example, A minor. Now that Runaway is based on that descending A minor G F E progression, which is also, that's an old progression. It's known in classical music as the Andalusian cadence. And that crops up in all kinds of places. It's a really interesting use of it John Lennon does in I'll Be Back. Where he starts in the major, minor, and then keeps oscillating between major and minor with it. And I found that the Dagad, like for Strawberry Fields Forever, for example, that it has, I ended up doing that in B flat because that hook, the Strawberry Fields Forever, is that E flat major 7. It's not a chord you can get in standard tuning. But then I realized that then I could also get, the Swarmandel, the zither riff that goes in there. And so being able to work in different keys. So Dagad for me is like the other standard tuning. I think, you want me to play Strawberry Fields? I could.
Yes. I was hoping you'd do that.
All right, here we go. Strawberry Fields Forever.
Beautiful, man. I've always loved your arrangement of that. Let's do a
Thanks.
short station break. And Tommy, why don't you shout out to some geo? Tell people where everyone is tuned in from.
Yeah. We have audience members right now in Las Vegas, Brazil. Long list. I'm going to move quick. Dallas, Kalamazoo, Suwanee, Georgia, San Diego, Connecticut, Ottawa, Uruguay, Lafayette, California, Denver, Colorado, Rio Rancho, New Mexico, New Hampshire, Delray Beach, the Ozarks, Arkansas, Brooklyn, Silicon Valley, Chicago, Auckland, New Zealand, Washington, D.C., Barrie, Ontario. That's right. Keep shouting out, guys. We'll get to you eventually. Washington, D.C., Barrie, Ontario, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Ireland, Courtenay, BC, Charlottesville, Virginia, Los Angeles. And that's what we've got for now. I mean, they're coming in, so we'll hit it again here in just a minute.
We will.
Tons of folks excited.
We hope everybody is safe and sound in their homes and healthy, of course. Also, Tommy, one more time on the trivia question.
Yeah. So the trivia question for you guys. What recent number one record did Laurence play? Number one album. That's right. Let's be clear. What recent number one album, and it's in the pop category, I think we could say, did Laurence play electric guitar? It's a big pop hit. What number one album did Laurence recently play a guitar on? Hit that in the link. Do not put it in the chat. Hit it in the link. There's a link to the trivia there in the description. Hit that. Put in your answer for a chance to win a $100 gift card to TrueFire.
Awesome. And Tommy or Seth, can you guys show LJ's TrueFire course?
Oh, absolutely. I believe we got that queued up. Here we go.
So guitaristics, rhythm, kind of the foundation of pretty much anything you're going to do with the guitar across any style. This is a really, really special project, very near and dear to our hearts, and really appreciated LJ taking the time to come and put this together. This is a course that, yep, there are fundamentals in there without a doubt, but this is, of course, whatever level of play and whatever style you happen to play. This provides a lot of insightful, techniques and understandings of, the foundations of rhythm. It's a very key and illuminating course of study. Check it out. And we'll put a link to it in the chat. Have a look at that and pick it up. So LJ, shall we go to Paganini?
Well, we're going to just back up a little bit.
Yeah.
In the Renaissance, the guitar was like basically a large ukulele. It had 4 courses. So the doubled strings, like a double string or a triple string, is known as a course. So a 12-string guitar is a 6-course instrument. And it was very common, so they, like on the lute, that you would have double strings because gut was not that reliable, and you could kind of fudge the tuning between the 2 strings and get kind of a slightly chorusy kind of sound out of it. Come the Baroque era, the guitar gains an extra course. So now it's a 5-course instrument. Doesn't really get to become the modern 6-string guitar until the 1770s, 1780s. And that had a lot to do with being able to actually make bass strings. There's a company which still exists called Savarez that figured out how to overwind wire over gut or silk to make a bottom, basically a bottom E. And within a few years, guitar mania kind of swept through Europe when the 6-string guitar became a really big deal. And by the time you get into the early part of the 19th century, you've got these players that we consider to be like the founding fathers of classical guitar, like Fernando Sor, Mauro Giuliani, no relation. And the next generation of players really achieved a very high level of virtuosity. In the violin world, we know of Paganini, but Paganini was also a guitarist. He didn't just play violin, he played guitar, but he wasn't the Paganini of the guitar. That accolade went to a man named Legnani, Luigi Legnani. And I'm going to play you a little bit of a Legnani caprice. The only thing I can say is this guy was a shredder. I mean, they could, really, I mean, you'll see, this is marked, and the music, this is marked prestissimo, which basically means as fast as possible. I can't get it up there, but I'll give you an idea anyway. Hang on, one more time. The first section. Now, I mean, just that lick. Now, if you can imagine, it played about twice as fast as I was actually playing it, shorter scale guitar. Legnani also had the distinction of being and Stauffer's famous, one of the things that characterizes the Stauffers is that they did the inline headstock, where you've got 6 tuners all in one row, rather than 3 on either side, which was, 150 years before Bigsby and Fender came up with the same concept. And Legnani's guitar was really the model for what C.F. Martin brought to America in 1833, because Martin had worked in the Stauffer factory. Stauffer also made the guitar for Franz Schubert, who was kind of like the McCartney of that era. One of the all-time great songwriters. And so you have this explosion of guitar playing. The next generation beyond Legnani was, there was a guitar player named Zanni di Ferranti, whose music is so dense and so complex that I can't even sight read it without getting a headache. I mean, it's just, there's so much going on. And he was really kind of probably the greatest virtuoso of that era. But the Ferranti name lived on. His grandson was an electrical engineer wizard and designed the electrical grid for London. And the Ferranti company ended up being the first company to market a commercial computer. So you went from guitar virtuoso to technology just in a couple of generations. But what's important to us as players is that when C.F. Martin left Vienna and went to New York in 1833, he took that Stauffer kind of style of guitar, which is not, the Viennese classical guitar was not like the Spanish classical. It had a much quicker attack. And really that kind of formed the foundation of the American classical guitar, of which this is an example. I mean, this is 1893, but functionally the design hadn't changed from the middle of the 19th century. Once C.F. Martin developed the X brace, as opposed to the fan bracing that's characteristic of the Spanish guitar, where the braces go off in a fan shape there. The X brace ended up proving to be perfect for steel string guitars, but of course C.F. Martin didn't know that when he came up with that. He just wanted a quick attack, I think. So I'm going to retune, because I'm going to play a little bit of a piece that became extremely important in the mid 19th century. there's a man named Henry Worrell, who was actually a teacher at a girls' school in Ohio. And he published in 1852, I think it was. He published a piece called The Celebrated Violet Waltz. In open G tuning, almost in tune. And then it wasn't that celebrated. It wasn't a hit. And of course, in those days, it was all sheet music. I mean, going back to Petrucci in the early 15th century, 1507 was the first music that was published for lute. By the middle of the 19th century, sheet music is huge. And even in the early 20th century, record sales were really driving sheet music sales. But Henry Worrell republished this piece, but he changed the title from The Celebrated Violet Waltz to the Spanish Fandango. And then it was a hit. But the tricky thing is that it's in open G tuning, but they had abandoned tablature by the end of the 18th century. So when and with tablature, it doesn't matter what tuning is, it just shows you where to put your fingers. So they basically, what Henry Worrell did was he had the music so that you would look at it and play what you would play as though it were in standard tuning, but the notes would come out differently. So if you saw the E at the top of the stave, you'd play what would normally be an E, but in this case, it's a D. So the Spanish Fandango and there's a whole set of variations that go on from there. But this became extremely popular, so much so that later in the century, if you ordered a guitar from Montgomery Ward, for example, mail order, in the 1890s, you would get a little booklet called The Eureka Method, which was written by a publisher, songwriter named Septimus Winner. Wonderful, wonderful name. And the Eureka Method had like kind of short pieces, easy pieces to play, and the Spanish Fandango was included in that. And to this day, there are blues players in the South that refer to open G tuning as Spanish tuning. And Henry Worrell also published a piece called the Siege of Sebastopol, which is in open D tuning, and that's known as Sebastopol tuning. So there's a tradition that evolved out of this. In fact, some people consider this to be the root of the blues, which makes no sense from a musical point of view because the chord progression, the modality of it is nothing like a blues. But guitaristically, the mechanics of being able to play in this open tuning and then just put one finger down, or a little later use a slide. That became kind of embedded in American guitar culture. You fast forward to Keith Richards, who uses open G tuning almost exclusively. In fact, takes the bottom string off so that his bottom string is the G. And you think about Honky Tonk Women. Hang on. Gives a whole new meaning to the expression "it was in tune at the factory." Come on. honky tonk women. You get to the chorus, that motif is the same motif as the Spanish Fandango, because guitaristically, it's just something that lays under the fingers. Whether Keith Richards was ever aware of Spanish Fandango is an open question, but he got open G tuning from Ry Cooder. And my guess is with Ry Cooder's musicological knowledge, he was probably aware of it. I've never had the opportunity to ask him. But there's just that kind of is built into the progressive guitar. Now, what happens is the guitar kind of gets entrenched on the East Coast, moves across the country. There's a whole bunch of West Coast guitar players, but then it keeps going and ends up in Hawaii. And there's a name that you only are aware of if you play Hawaiian guitar. Joseph Kekuku is a very important figure because he was the one who realized that you could take a slide and basically invented the Hawaiian guitar. Why is this important to us? Well, because the Hawaiian guitar was the most popular guitar in the first few decades of the 20th century in America. You think about the fact that the first solid body guitars were Hawaiian. You know, the Rickenbacker frying pan was a lap steel. And the number of solid body lap steels that were made in the 1930s, it's just, I mean, it's remarkable. There was an exhibition recently at the MIM, the Musical Instrument Museum in Phoenix, where they were tracing the origins of the electric guitar, and the majority of the instruments in there were Hawaiian. Joseph Kekuku was so popular that Mary Pickford, the actress, would hire him to play for her before she had to do a scene where she would cry, because the expressiveness of the Hawaiian guitar was so intense that it would make her cry. And wow. So, but that's a whole other discussion in terms of that aspect. But this is kind of cool. This is an Oahu. It's kind of the kid brother to a Weissenborn.
Nice.
Hollow neck, Koa. This dates from the 1920s. And actually, that belongs to my wife, Hope. She had that before we ever met. Okay. Standard tuning guitar. Here we go. But meanwhile, in the steel string guitar world, in the regular six string as opposed to the Hawaiian six string, you really, where things get important, and here's another guitar hero that you probably haven't heard of, is Arnold Schultz. Now, this is somebody that you would figure would probably have a deli on the Lower East Side with a name like Arnold Schultz, but he was a Kentucky coal miner who was a guitarist and a violinist, and he was the one that, although Cannonball Rag is credited to Mel Travis, it's thought that Arnold Schultz actually came up with the original. And this whole thing of the alternate bass, and this comes about, he taught a guitar player named Kennedy Jones. And Kennedy Jones used to do, this is kind of 1916, 17, round about there. Kennedy Jones would be playing like hayrides with a violinist. A very common combination was the acoustic guitar and the violin. And because there was no bass player and he was having to lean into the bass notes, he was constantly getting a blister on his thumb. And one day he walked into a music store and there's a display of thumb picks. Now, the thumb picks came from the Hawaiian players. That was really where the earliest pictures that I've seen of anybody using a thumb pick is always Hawaiian guitar players. But he realized that with a thumb pick, he could execute those bass notes and be able to not get the blister on his thumb and have a strong propulsive kind of bass. And that's really kind of the thread that leads you through the Everly brothers, not Don and Phil, but Ike Everly, their dad, and his two brothers, who were the original Everly brothers, who were all guitar players. Ike Everly leads you into, also Mose Rager is another one, leads you to Chet Atkins and Mel Travis, is that Kentucky thumb picking, that approach with the alternate bass. And the difference between Chet doing a kind of a very clean alternation as opposed to Mel Travis hitting more of a chord on the backbeat. There's subtle differences. If you want real kind of granular detail on that stuff, go to Doyle Dykes, because Doyle is a master of the Chet and the Merle and the Jerry Reed styles. And I'm going to play you, let me play you a tune that, for me, when I was a teenager, I had a Merle Travis album, and I never really figured out exactly how he did it. But one of my dad's favorite tunes was All of Me. And I just figured out my own arrangement, and I still play it to this day.
Beautiful, man.
That's true from 1931. All right.
So-
So, are there any questions?
Yeah, I was just going to do a
Charge you.
short station break and encourage people. We've
Okay.
got maybe another 25 minutes here. And then you're doing another Facebook live stream is it at 5:00 today?
I know 1:30 Pacific time. So
Okay.
4:30.
So at 4:30.
It's tea time with LJ.
Okay. So that's at 4:30, which will be immediately after this. So I want to keep you kind of tuned into the time you have here. We will find the link to that and we will post it here in the chat so you guys can jump right over to that from here. Really,
Yeah, it's just my Facebook profile.
Just your Facebook page if they go right there.
Yeah.
All right, we'll post a link to that. And then Tommy, really quickly, do another quick geo shout out if you would.
Oh, absolutely. We've got, let's see here. Continuing on with the list, we've got Quebec, Jacksonville, Walnut Creek, California, Rio de Janeiro, Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, New York, Carson City, Nevada, Boston, Russia, UK, hey there, Wales, Grosse Pointe, Michigan, Sweden, Chile, that is, Czech Republic, Mississippi, Oregon, and Germany. All in the house right now. Very
It's
cool.
amazing, LJ, right? This kind of like the internet kind of creates this community of, music and guitar lovers. And, we get to hang together for an hour and a half. It's wasn't quite
without having to get on an airplane.
I know you don't. Trivia, also one last plug for the trivia question. Just click the link underneath the video, answer your question there. We're going to give away $100 TrueFire gift card to anyone that answered that correctly. And the hint for you is you will find the answer on LJ's website, laurencejuber.com, which you should definitely tune into. And also, if you go to his music tab, you'll see, a very long list of his recordings. Urge you
Actually,
to
the music tab has all my solo albums. The guitarist tab has my recording credits and scoring credits.
Oh, there's another hint.
Okay, there you go. And also, while you're clicking that link underneath the video, you see that thumbs up. Please give it a click. It's a great way to show your love, show your appreciation, and to spread that love. And I know that we would appreciate it, and certainly LJ would appreciate it as well. So I was hoping we'd have time, LJ, to get to this next section in your Guitarology presentation. So the stage is yours.
Okay, well, so you've really got kind of the two, this kind of multiple threads that exist in the early 20th century, where you go from kind of basically what we think of as a classical guitar approach, and then everything kind of explodes with radio and with records and with archtop guitars. The New York jazz guitar players like Eddie Lang, for example, bringing a very different approach. Let me grab the archtop real quick. Hang on. Here's a 1947 Gibson L7. It's a very different kind of sound to the flat top. Really, the first blues guitar player, recorded blues guitar player that you could really pinpoint was Sylvester Weaver, who wrote a piece called Guitar Rag, which was that was purloined by Bob Wills and became steel guitar rag. As so often happens. Same thing happened with Cannonball rag with Arnold Schultz that I mentioned earlier, where it becomes a signature for somebody else, and that's how really these things evolve. So Sylvester Weaver recorded that, I think, something like 1923. 1925, 26 is when electrical recording comes in, when microphones got invented. And then he re-recorded it shortly after. The first recording that you can really point to and say that's kind of blues lead guitar was Lonnie Johnson in 1928, 688 Glide. Which was just him and a piano player, so 6 strings and 88 keys. But he does the kind of these kind of lead guitar, bends with vibrato and licks, and that was really Lonnie Johnson was the first to do that. Eddie Lang recorded with Lonnie Johnson. There's some amazing duets of the two of them together. But Eddie Lang couldn't record under his own name because black and white musicians weren't allowed to record together for a while. So he recorded under the name Blind Willie Dunn, which actually turned out that it was his newsboy, was Willie Dunn. But Eddie Lang, of course, died quite young. Was a very good friend of Bing Crosby. Now, not the Bing Crosby that we associate with the sweaters and the kind of the boo 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 kind of thing. I mean, a young Bing Crosby was a jazz guy. He was a pothead. He would scat sing Bix Beiderbecke solos. I mean, it was really, he was a real jazz age guy. But Bing Crosby was really the first singer to realize what you could do with a microphone, because before that they were all singing to megaphones to be heard. But Eddie Lang was a big influence on Django Reinhardt, for example. Django's in Paris doing what became known as gypsy jazz. I mean, Django wouldn't have recognized the expression gypsy jazz. He was a gypsy and he played jazz, but as far as he was concerned, it was hot. It was hot jazz that he was playing. I mean, all the Django, just masterful as a guy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, anybody that you can point to as being kind of the ultimate guitar hero. But what happens is in the 30s, the guitar becomes really part of the rhythm section in the jazz big bands, and the archtop takes over. At least in that world. In the flat top world, it was really the country singers. I mean, when Martin developed the orchestra model guitar, which is the model that is my signature model, their intention was to get it into the hands of the jazz players, but it was really the country singers. It was the cowboys that adopted that. And then when the Dreadnought came along, of course, they all went for the bigger, louder guitar. But in blues, I think that the early blues players, especially, I mean, the ones that were playing slide early on, it really looks like they got their slide chops from the Hawaiian guitar players, because the Hawaiian guitar players were touring worldwide throughout the early part of the 20th century. And some of the early blues players were playing lap style rather than playing, just in regular position. And so of all of the blues players, I mean, I mentioned Arnold Schultz, but on the blues world, Ike Zimmerman, another one who should have had a deli on the Lower East Side. Ike Zimmerman was Robert Johnson's guitar teacher. So when they would, play they would go across the street so they wouldn't disturb anybody. Across the street from Zimmerman's house, where Robert Johnson lived for a year, was a graveyard, and they would sit on the graves and play, part of the Robert Johnson mystique. But you also have to remember that Robert Johnson wasn't just a blues player. He could play anything. It's just that the records that he made were blues records. But musicians in general had to be versatile and had to have a pretty solid repertoire. And that's true even when you get into the jazz world. I mean, you consider how many of the jazz guitar players, Mundell Lowe, for example, Johnny Smith, were players in the radio orchestras, in the radio big bands. They had commercial gigs. Bill Evans, at the height of his fame as a jazz piano player, was still doing society gigs in New York because he knew all the tunes. So, we kind of associate these iconic musicians with particular styles of music without recognizing that, to a large extent, they were very versatile and could play all kinds of stuff and would make money however they could make their money. Do we have any questions before I kind of head into the whole stretch?
We do. Okay. Mark Holt asks, a hopefully not too vague question for Laurence. What are you seeing when you look at the fretboard? Because he wants to see that too. But what do you see?
Well, I don't look when I'm playing. A lot of the time I'm not looking, I'm actually picturing it. It's a combination of muscle memory and note location. I mean, I'm really very conscious of the notes that I'm playing. For example, because I'm not just playing inside the box. I'm, let's say I've got an E chord. I might be playing it as a first inversion chord. And I'm thinking, okay, that's a G sharp, that's an E, that's a B, that's a D. Maybe there's an F sharp on top, make it a ninth chord. I'm really looking at it as a musical, the musical spectrum of it. So I'm not just looking for shapes. I mean, yeah, the shapes are part of the muscle memory, but it's the notes themselves are really the crucial thing. Is what are the notes? What are their relationships? How can I integrate an open string into this? Can I play, instead of doing, play it like that, for example? Use an open B string instead of hammering on from a B to a B sharp. I don't know why I did it there, but very much kind of looking at the fretboard as in terms of the meta information. When I say meta information, what I refer to is just the whole musical spectrum. It's almost like having a piano keyboard in my head. The piano keyboard is great because every note is in one specific place, whereas on the guitar, it could be in multiple places. So there's a definite sense of, okay, what gets me from point A to point B, and how is the fingering a crucial factor in this? How am I going to finger this particular progression to get the results that I need? And of course, it changes in a different tuning. The notes are in a different place, which is why it's really important to me to be conscious of what notes I'm playing so that I can really kind of work that in. But with whatever I'm doing, the most important thing is, where's the melody? Where does the melody sit? How do I voice it? How do I support it? If that kind of answers the question.
Great answer.
That could be 3 hours just answering that question.
I know. That's a whole guitaristics course right there. Roberto Veloso asks, does your Touchtones book also include these connections between music of the past and the present?
To some extent, it does. I mean, there's a historical timeline. There are references to some contemporary stuff. So it covers much of that. but you know, I'm constantly discovering new things. So it gets more and more granular as time goes on.
Yeah, if you ever get a chance to watch this, and you'll see in the thread several dozen requests to have you actually put a big, you know, this has been a very illuminating. I mean, you know, I've learned a ton, as has, you know, the entire audience. No one's really connected those dots like you have here. Even the, you know, the notion of tab being invented, you know, a lot of people think tab is a modern, you know, device,
Oh,
and it
goodness,
really
no.
dates way back.
No, I mean, the fact is, in the early days of music publishing, I mean, like, you know, early 16th century, you couldn't put multiple parts on the stave. They didn't have the typeset capability to do that. So vocal music, there was no such thing as a score. You know, in vocal music, there would be 4 separate parts, let's say treble, you know, soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and they would be arranged in around on 4 sides of something that you could sit at a table and everybody would see their own part in their own space. But there was no score. But tablature was much easier because they could have the 6 lines for the strings and put numbers or letters on those lines, and they could typeset that. So yeah, I mean, that's that. But ironically, just at the point where you could really use it in the 19th century, where they started doing alter tuning stuff, then it goes away and it doesn't come back until the 20th century.
Crazy. Couple more questions. Have you ever been to the German Museum of Music in, I can't pronounce it, Markneukirchen, Germany, where C.F. Martin is from?
Yeah, Markneukirchen. Actually, I was there on a Monday, and I wanted to go to the Framus Museum, but it was closed. In fact, the museums were closed on Mondays, and that was my only day there because I was on tour in Germany and in the Czech Republic. And Markneukirchen, which is where C.F. Martin came from, is kind of right, almost on the Czech border. But I know, yeah, I got pictures of myself in the town square. So.
Cool. Any suggestions, Paul wants to know, for right hand finger picking exercises? Just one good exercise.
You know what's really good? That there's a classical study by Hector Villalobos, the Brazilian composer, and the pattern. It's just this is. Especially when it gets to. It's a really interesting progression. That's good practice. But pretty much, I mean, you know, my philosophy is just play tunes and figure out how to make it work. You know, and do simple arrangements. I mean, there's always, you know, the basic finger picking exercise where you just do the alternate bass. So it's like on beat 1 is the thumb and the middle finger. Then beat 2 is thumb on the 4th string, and then the index finger on the 3rd string on the and then that kind of works, you know, for so many, you know, folk tunes. That's a good pattern to learn. And beyond that, I mean, you know, I don't really do exercises. I mean, I play tunes and figure out how I can get what I need out of one particular tune, how to make the technique work for that particular tune.
We have 5 minutes left. Any chance we could get Little Wing, a performance of Little Wing?
Yeah.
Incredible.
Incredible. LJ, thank you so much. We saved you 2 minutes to go grab
There
your
you go.
tea. Prepare your tea for Tea Time with LJ. It's on his Facebook page. We posted it here. You're amazing. You really are.
Oh.
That was an
Well, thanks
incredible,
for doing this.
just incredible
And
time
let's do it
travel
again.
journey. I
Let's do
hope
it again.
so.
And maybe once we get my channel set up, I can do some, some DADGAD lessons and a few things for you. So
Fabulous. Thank you,
all right, well,
LJ. We'll see you on Facebook.
all right, cheers.
All right, man.
See you guys.